Spain owned all the gold in the Americas. They were also the most indebted country in Europe. Here's how that happened. Before we start, if you want to understand money, investing, in the stock market in the simplest way possible, subscribe to the Stick Market, where finance is made easy. Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to find out that your country has just discovered a literal mountain of money. Not a metaphorical one, an actual physical mountain filled with billions of dollars worth of pure gold and silver. That is exactly what happened to Spain in the 1500s. Following their arrival in the Americas, Spanish conquistadors stumbled upon wealth beyond the wildest dreams of any king or emperor who had ever lived. They took over massive, hyper-rich mines, like the legendary Silver Mountain of Potosi. Every single year, a massive armada of heavily armed galleons sailed across the Atlantic Ocean, carrying tons of precious metals straight into the Spanish treasury. By any logical baseline of economics, Spain should have been set for the next 5 centuries. They were, without a single shred of doubt, the richest empire on the face of the planet. Yet, in the year 1557, King Philip II had to sit down at his desk, pick up a quill, and sign a piece of paper that shocked the entire civilized world. He declared that the Spanish Empire was officially bankrupt. They could not pay their bills. They were defaulting on their loans. And here's the kicker. This was not a one-time fluke. Spain did not just go broke in 1557. They went bankrupt again in 1575. And again in 1596, and again in 1607, 4 times in a 60-year span. The absolute wealthiest nation in human history looked at its international bankers and said, "We don't have the cash." How on earth does the country that controls almost all the world's gold go completely belly up 4 times in a row? It sounds completely counterintuitive. It feels like a paradox. But the reality is a fascinating, forgotten story of bad math, immense hubris, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what wealth actually is. To understand how Spain broke its own economy, we have to look at how they viewed their sudden fortune. When the gold and silver started flooding into the ports of Seville, the Spanish crown thought they had won the ultimate economic lottery. They assumed that more precious metal automatically equaled more wealth. It makes sense on a surface level, right? If you have 10 gold coins, you are 10 times richer than the guy with 1 gold coin. But Spain accidentally ran a massive real-world experiment that proved a painful economic truth. Money is not wealth. Production is wealth. When all that silver and gold arrived in Spain, it didn't just sit in a vault. It entered the local economy. Suddenly, regular Spanish citizens, merchants, and nobles had a massive amount of cash burning holes in their pockets. But while the amount of money in Spain skyrocketed, the number of actual goods available to buy stayed exactly the same. Spain didn't suddenly have more cows, more grain, more shoes, or more houses. They just had a mountain of silver chasing a limited amount of food and goods. Think about what happens when everyone in a small town suddenly gets handed $1 million, but the local grocery store only has 10 loaves of bread left on the shelf. The price of bread doesn't stay at $2. It explodes to $200 or $2,000. This is the classic definition of inflation. And in the 16th century, Spain caused a continent-wide disaster known to historians as the Price Revolution. Prices in Spain quadrupled over the course of the century. The everyday cost of living became so absurdly high that regular Spanish citizens could barely afford basic necessities. Even worse, this massive inflation completely destroyed Spain's domestic businesses. Because everything inside Spain was now wildly expensive to produce, Spanish manufactures, like textiles, leather, and metalwork, became drastically overpriced. Why would a French merchant buy a pair of shoes made in Madrid when he could buy the exact same quality shoes made in Paris for a quarter of the price? Spanish industries couldn't compete. They began to wither away and die. Instead of using their new money to build factories, improve agriculture, or invest in infrastructure, Spain simply used their American silver to buy everything from other countries. They bought their clothes from England. They bought their grain from France. They bought their luxury goods from Italy and the Netherlands. The gold from the Americas was arriving in Spain on a Monday, and by Friday it was being shipped right back out to pay for foreign imports. Spain became a glorified pipeline. The wealth flowed out of the ground in Peru, traveled across the ocean, paused briefly in Madrid, and then settled permanently in the banks of Spain's European competitors. If inflation was the slow-acting poison that weakened Spain's economy, there was another factor that acted as an immediate self-inflicted wound: war. During the 1500s, the rulers of Spain, first Emperor Charles V, and then his son, King Philip II, did not see themselves merely as political leaders. They saw themselves as the ultimate defenders of the Catholic faith and the undisputed masters of Europe. They wanted to maintain a massive global empire, suppress the Protestant Reformation, and fight off the Ottoman Empire all at the same time. King Philip II famously wrote that they were fighting for the cause of God, and when you believe you are fighting for God, you don't look at the budget. Warfare in the 16th century was transitioning into a highly professional, brutally expensive enterprise. It wasn't just about calling up local knights anymore. It required standing armies of thousands of highly trained mercenary soldiers, massive fleets of warships, modern artillery, and complex supply chains. Spain had the best army in the world, the legendary tercios, but those soldiers didn't fight for glory or religious devotion. They fought for cold, hard cash, and they demanded to be paid on time. The issue was that the cost of fighting multiple wars across Europe simultaneously completely dwarfed the massive income coming from the Americas. The gold and silver fleets were incredibly lucrative, but they were also highly unpredictable. Sometimes a fleet was delayed by bad weather, sometimes it was attacked by pirates, but the mercenary armies in Flanders, Italy, and Germany couldn't wait around for the next weather report. They needed their gold right now. If they weren't paid, they would simply drop their weapons, mutiny, and sometimes sack the very cities they were supposed to protect. To bridge the gap between when their bills were due and when the treasure ships actually arrived, the Spanish crown did what modern governments do when they need cash fast. They turned to international lenders. Spain became completely dependent on high-interest loans from wealthy banking families in Genoa, Augsburg, and Antwerp. These bankers knew Spain was desperate, so they charged incredibly high interest rates. To secure these loans, the Spanish kings had to sign agreements called asientos. These contracts essentially pledged Spain's future revenue as collateral. Before a single ounce of silver even left the mines of South America, it was already legally owned by a banker in Italy or Germany. Spain was living paycheck to paycheck on a multi-billion-dollar global scale. The feedback loop looked like a trap. Spain would sign a loan with Genovese bankers to get immediate cash to pay mercenary armies. Then, as war costs escalated or American treasure fleets were delayed, Spain could not pay the interest on that existing loan. To fix it, they would sign a new loan at an even higher interest rate just to cover the old one. By the mid-1550s, the interest payments alone on Spain's national debt consumed more than 50% of the country's entire annual revenue. More than half of all the wealth collected from a massive global empire was going straight into the pockets of foreign bankers just to pay off the interest on old debts. It was a mathematically impossible system. Something had to break. On August 17, 1557, King Philip II finally admitted defeat. The crown suspended all payments to its creditors. The interest loop had officially choked out the empire. This historic default ruined several major banking houses in Europe, sent shockwaves through the global financial markets, and temporarily froze Spain's military operations. Because the underlying structural issues were never fixed, this exact cycle repeated itself every few decades. The gold kept coming, the wars kept raging, the debt kept piling up, and the country kept crashing into bankruptcy. The bankruptcy of Spain in 1557 is one of history's ultimate cautionary tales because it completely shatters our conventional instinct about wealth and power. We are conditioned to think that resources equal prosperity. We look at countries with massive oil reserves, massive gold deposits, or incredible natural assets and assume they are destined for economic success. But history shows us that resources can easily become a curse if they are not backed by a functioning, productive society. Spain had a historic opportunity. They could have used their unprecedented American fortune to build top-tier universities, invest in advanced agricultural techniques, develop powerful domestic manufacturing industries, and create a resilient economy that would thrive for centuries. Instead, they treated their gold like an infinite credit card. They used it to fund unwinnable, ideological foreign wars and to buy everyday items from foreign nations because they couldn't be bothered to produce anything themselves. They mistook the symbol of wealth, precious metal, for wealth itself. When the silver mines eventually dried up in the 17th and 18th centuries, Spain was left with absolutely nothing to fall back on. Their industries were gone, their currency was debased, and their population was impoverished. The richest country in human history had spent its way into irrelevance. It serves as a stark, timeless reminder: real wealth is never dug out of the ground. Real wealth is built through what your people can create, innovate, and produce. Without that, even a mountain of pure gold is just a very heavy path to going broke. If you enjoyed the video, so hit subscribe and click the bell button for more updates. See you in the next episode of Stick Market.